Hello and welcome to this lecture on the history of cinema. In this episode, we will discuss the developments in the medium of cinema during the First World War and after it. In this phase, cinema was silent and was concentrated mostly in the developed world. Cotton, nitric acid and sulfuric acid are some of the material used in manufacturing of photographic film on which feature films are shot. These very material are used for production of high explosives. As the First World War broke out in the second decade of the 20th century, the priorities shifted rapidly. France, Germany, Great Britain and Italy got involved immediately. America's participation started much later in 1917. Film stock, or the photographic film, for the obvious reasons, was in short supply in Europe. The international distribution of completed films was also restricted due to the prevailing situation. America's limited involvement in the war gave a few advantages to the American filmmakers. In a time when most of the big economies of the world were drained by war, American economy was experiencing an upsurge. They had a huge audience, inspired and innovative filmmakers, and a tradition of entrepreneurship. This era proved to be crucial in making American industry into the world's most powerful film industry, a position that it has maintained till now. Three developments of this time were particularly significant. D.W. Griffith, the filmmaker who had been experimenting with the form and also producing short films, started making features. A tradition of American screen comedy began with Max Sennett and Charles Chaplin. America also established a system of mass production, distribution and exhibition of film content. These three developments were happening in America's motion picture industry in the second decade of 20th century. When most of the other film producing economies were suffering due to war, the American industry experienced three of its most important developments. D.W. Griffith had been actively involved in filmmaking since 1907 and his output was prolific. All his works were short duration films, mostly less than 15 minutes. In 1915, he brought all his experience and expertise to create a huge epic with a scale unparalleled so far. Though he broke no new ground in terms of the craft and technique in Birth of a Nation, the scale, expense and duration was unprecedented. The duration of the film was almost 190 minutes, a huge leap from the norm of 1 to 10 minutes. The film involved several long takes with huge crowds. Gigantic sets were used to suit the narration of an epic. He retained similar qualities in his next film, Intolerance. This technically brilliant Civil War epic was based on The Klansman, a novel by Thomas Dixon. The Birth of a Nation premiered with a phenomenal ticket price of $2. It popularized the expressive close-up, naturalistic acting, the flashback technique, exciting cross-cutting and other elements that are even today considered the structural principles of narrative filmmaking, especially of the classical Hollywood cinema. It introduced the historical epic and period piece as a film genre and defined the language of film. A budget of approximately $111,000 made it the most expensive film till then, and its racist theme also made it highly controversial. It was the first American movie to be shown in the White House. The then President Woodrow Wilson described it as writing history with lighting. At about the same time when Griffith was creating new definitions and power for screen language, a distinctive line of film comedy began. This category of films had its own masters and masterpieces. None of the seriousness and sentimentality which had become a signature of Griffith's work. But like Griffith's work, this stream of filmmaking also contributed significantly to addressing the basic problems of the art form. These films had humorous content, but they used the visual grammar in almost the same way. the need for elements of visual narrative, the selection and arrangement of shots were equally important for the effectiveness of these films. Max Sennett was quick to understand this development. He put this new technique into practice for comic purposes. Actually, Sennett did not invent any fresh techniques, but he made important contribution in the development of techniques by applying them in practice. He made practical use of other people's experiments and also brought his own insight into them. Sennett evolved and popularized the style for narrating comic tales in silent cinema. In these silent films, jokes flowed uninterrupted. One gag led to another and the audience were left weak and helpless, weeping with laughter. As I said earlier, in terms of use of cinematic technique and grammar, his work dealt with same issues which were being tackled by Griffith in his films. Like Griffith, Sennett also had a band of students and followers who learned the art of creating meaning on film under his guidance and apprenticeship. His most well-known protege was Charles Chaplin. Sennett and his partner Adam Kessel discovered Chaplin when he was performing in a touring English music hall company. Sennett and Kessel hired him very soon. Within a year, Chaplin was starring in Tillies' Punctured romance directed by Max Sennett. His co-actors in this feature-length comedy were Mary Dressler, Mabel Normand, Max Swain and Charles Bennett. These were the best-known comedy stars of the day. Tilly's Punctured Romance is generally considered the first feature-length comedy. It represents Sennett's slapstick humor. This style is quite different from tragicomic combination which Chaplin evolved subsequently and for which he is still recognized. The feature-length films were introduced by the independent producers. In those days, there existed a certain motion picture patents company, a kind of combine that had included all of the principal early producers, most notably Edison, Biograph and Vitagraph. It was established in 1908 and was generally referred to as trust. The combine gradually failed in its efforts to monopolize through its patent claims and its attempt to control the manufacture of equipment. It had consistently resisted longer films and stuck to the outright sale of prints through its distribution arm, General Film Company. It was established in 1910. As the features became more popular, a rental system evolved where the prints made the rounds of the theatre and were returned to the producers, most of whom were independents. The independents emerged stronger in the struggle, and by 1914 and 1915, the trust was clearly rendered inconsequential by its competition. The independents triumphed due to their enthusiasm and ingenuity and gained the control over producing and distributing films. By 1970, through court decisions in a series of antitrust suits, the Motion Picture Patents Company was declared legally dead. In these years, several producers suffered from legal harassment and goon squads of the trust. To escape these, many producers moved out of New York and established a base in South California. Slowly, the center of production shifted from New York to Los Angeles in South California. By now, feature films were established as the single most important commodity. The independents were the new dominant powers as the old trust companies faded away. A new model for industrial expansion was emerging. This model was to remain dominant for several decades to come. The industry followed general lines of manufacturing, wholesale and retail. Its contemporary automobile industry proved to be an inspiration. Henry Ford's innovative assembly line had grown in nearby Detroit. There were quite a few similarities in the two industries. Both have enormous annual costs of production. Geographically, both were located near raw materials and sources of power. Detroit was close to coal, oil, iron ore and steel mills. For the motion picture industry, the extraordinary variety of California scenery meant virtually any sort of locale was available within 200 kilometers of Los Angeles. These included mountain, deserts, ocean, forests, rolling fields, a huge variety of locations. The studios also evolved their own way of mass producing films in almost an assembly line kind of way. The production supervisor selected scripts and appointed director, along with crew and cast to finish the project. The scripts were based on the ideas which had been tried and tested by then. In fact, a kind of formula and a system of genres was already in place. Thomas H. Ince was the first person to function as a studio head or production supervisor, planning and supervising an entire production program. He supervised production of hundreds of films. Many of these were westerns. The technical crews produced film after film in the same genre under his supervision. These repeated practices led to an improved technical quality. He contributed to the development of the western genre. It proved to be as popular as the melodramas of Griffith and comedies of Sennett. These three pioneers joined hands in 1915 in a newly formed company called Triangle Film Corporation. Ince initiated a method of production which became standard Hollywood practice in 1920s. It could not bring in absolute domination of a single personality as it would be required in an art form. Rather, this practice of art by committee ensured a high level of standardized technical excellence. These mass-produced films looked alike, so like development of various automobile types like the sedan and the sports roadster, they also prepared various models for films like formula of women's picture, the comedy, action adventure, etc., and with some variations within each type. The cultivation of the star personality also ensured constant flow of audience. Mary Pickford, Mabel Normand, Charlie Chaplin and Dove Fairbanks were the stars of those times. The formula and the star system demanded a repetition with variation. The whole enterprise got involved in unprecedented amount of promotion and advertising. Within 25 years of existence, films had become an industry complete with a formula for mass production and a system for distribution. The industry was located in huge permanent studios clustered mostly around Los Angeles and was now popularly known as Hollywood. By the end of the First World War in 1918, the American film industry had achieved all the essentials necessary to ensure its success as an art industry. A steady flow of features accompanied by shorts, especially popular comedies, a system of distribution where income flowed back through exhibitors and distributors to the producers. Also, a chain of theatres. Once the war was over, the medium started growing outside of the national boundaries, and the Americans could now export their product across the Atlantic as well. The clout of the American cinema ensured dominance over the screens across the world. Germans contributed to the art by working on the refinement of technique. Germans had been participating in the development of cinema from the very beginning. It was in the November 1895 that Max Sklodowski and his brother Emil unveiled their invention, a film projector called the Bioscope, at the Wintergarten Music Club in Berlin. This was actually before the first paid demonstration of the Lumiere brothers' cinematograph in Paris on December 28th of the same year. Max attended this demo and realized that the cinematograph was technically superior to his Bioscope. Another pioneering effort by the Germans was the use of Geneva drive. Geneva drive facilitates the intermittent movement of film in camera or a projector. Till 1914, foreign films were freely imported in Germany. In the silent era, the language was no barrier for Danish and Italian films, which became extremely popular in Germany. The star system and serialized stories were other features of the popular German cinema of this phase. The First World War affected the European nations much more than it did the United States of America. The import of film was restricted, creating a gap in the market. The film screening venues had to look at other options for content. In 1917, Universum Film AG or UFA was founded with the purpose to nationalize the industry. The government had realized the potential of the new medium for propaganda. The government, however, had to mix the patriotic messages with liberal doses of entertainment to make it acceptable to the audience. The government support, coupled with the tradition of ingenuity in cinema, made sure that the German film industry soon became the largest in Europe. The post-war period saw inflation in the economy and a boom in the film industry. But most of the films were still being made at shoestring budgets. And the need to save money is actually considered as one of the contributing factors to the rise of German Expressionism. Expressionist films used artistic images with rich symbolism to tell their stories. Stark realism was not their virtue. The mood in Germany after First World War was grim, and the film of this time focused heavily on crime and horror. One of the initial and most well-known films of this time is Robert Vienne's The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Released in 1920, this expressionist film used images painted on the floors and walls to represent objects. Its effect heavily relied on the use of non-realistic sets with exaggerated geometry. Even light and shade was painted in some cases. The story involved the dark hallucinations of an insane man. The films of this period are also known for an exaggerated acting style and unnatural costume design. Other notable works of Expressionism are Friedrich Wilhelm Murnau's The Nosferatu, which was released in 1922. Carl Boyne and Paul Wegener's The Golem, How He Came into the World is another important film. The Expressionist movement was vibrant till mid 1920s, and it continued to influence world cinema even in the years afterward. Its influence can be particularly seen in American horror films and film noir. The works of European directors like Jean Cocteau and Ingmar Bergman also bears the Expressionist imprint. The government stake in the UFA was sold off to Deutsche Bank in 1921. UFA was the most important German producer in 1920s, producing almost 600 films per year. In addition to UFA, there were some 230 film companies in business in Berlin alone at this time. However, film industry financing was a fragile business in the unstable economy of the Weimar Republic. Fritz Lang's Metropolis is amongst the most well-known films of this time. Others include Die Nibelungen, also by Lang, The Last Laugh by Murnau, and Madame Dubarry by Ernst Lubitsch. By 1920s, gradually the influence of Expressionism gave way to a variety of other genres and styles. Socially concerned themes staged a comeback with a dose of realism. The influence of new objectivity may also be seen in the trend towards so-called morality films, which dealt with scandalous subjects like abortion, prostitution, homosexuality and addiction. Another artistic movement of German cinema at this time was that of chamber drama. The movement is particularly associated with the screenwriter Karl Mayr and films such as Murnau's The Last Laugh. These films tended to revolve around ordinary people living in often dreary, ordinary settings, often called instinct films because they emphasized the impulses and intimate psychology of the characters. Most of these films had small casts and few shots. This movement also relied heavily on the use of camera movements to explore the rather intimate and simple spaces. Aside from the major movements already addressed, German filmmakers at this time were known as innovators for their creative usage of mise-en-scène and camera movement. They made striking use of moving camera. They used it to probe the character, to follow the protagonist, and to see the world from a subjective point of view. The Last Laugh was one of the films which used these innovations to striking effect. With Germans, the camera became subjective. The lighting was very important to all kind of filmmakers in Germany. It was being used to set the overall mood. They pioneered the use of key lighting and the use of the main light at a particular position known as the key light. It is the brightest light on the set, usually suggesting a source off screen. The importance that the German filmmakers of this era attached to set design was also an important factor in their spatial effectiveness and unique quality. Most of the films were shot completely inside the studio. German influence on the American films was persistent, lasting decades after the first invasion. The imitation of German successes and presence of German professionals combined to alter prevailing American style in regard to movie camera and lighting. One example is the horror series of Universal Studios, which relied on sinister and fantastic subjects. Expressionist lighting, makeup, and costume and special effects cinematography. This style later evolved into what French term as film noir. As the commerce affected the art of the German industry, it lost talented creators, technicians, and performers to America. USSR, the State of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, came into existence on December 30, 1922. Lenin believed that film would be the most ideal propaganda tool for the Soviet Union because of its mass popularity amongst the citizens. It was officially adopted for educating the masses in the ways, means, and successes of communism. It was a policy initiated by Lenin and furthered by Stalin. The time between the World War I and the revolution had left USSR with a poor infrastructure and resource crunch. The cinema halls were in shambles. Several of the cinema entrepreneurs and workers of pre-Soviet Russia had left the country. The new government did not have the funds to put into an extensive reworking of the film industry. Thus, they initially opted for project approval and censorship guidelines while leaving industry in the private hands. The first new film release in Soviet Russia did not exactly fit this mold. This was Father Sergius, a religious film completed during the last weeks of the Russian Empire but not yet exhibited. It appeared on Soviet screens in 1918. Beyond this, the government was principally able to fund only shorts, educational films, and most notably the propaganda films intended to agitate or energize and enthuse the masses to participate fully in approved Soviet activities and deal effectively with those who remained in opposition to the new order. These short films were often simple visual aids and accompaniments to live lectures and speeches and were carried from city to city, town to town, village to village, along with the lecturer to indoctrinate the entire countryside, even reaching areas where film had not been previously seen. Newsreels as documentaries were the other major form of earliest Soviet cinema. Dziga Vertov's newsreel series Kino Pravda, the best known of these, lasted from 1922 to 1925 and had a propagandistic bent. Vertov used the series to promote socialist realism but also to experiment with the cinema. In fact, the Soviet filmmakers of this phase are especially known for providing a theory of cinema. They were practitioners but also the philosophers of this art form. We will discuss the contributions of these filmmakers in the next lecture of this series. I hope you like this lecture. Thanks for watching.